Lie on your back with your knees bent and your feet flat on the floor, pointed straight ahead. Put a pillow or a block directly between your knees. You want something firm enough that doesn't allow your knees to move inward too much. A soft pillow would allow too much movement. So find something that maybe you can fold in half that gives you a firm, textured pushback. Place your arms out to the side at a 45-degree angle with your palms face up. Squeeze your knees inward into the pillow and then release. Repeat for the recommended number of repetitions. The purpose of this exercise is to get your hips to sync up together using the inner thigh muscles and the front of your hips, your hip flexors. Your abs should remain relaxed, your lower back's relaxed, and your breathing should be nice, slow, and rhythmic throughout the entire duration of this exercise. Balance and symmetry check. Be mindful of, do both hips work together at the same time, speed, and intensity? Is the work on one hip in the same exact spot on the opposite hip, or is it different? This is how imbalance and asymmetry shows up within your body, and over time, this will balance and level out. Lie on your back with your arms out to the side, palms face up, and arms 45 degrees. Your feet are going to be placed flat on the floor with both feet pointed straight ahead. Bring the bottoms of your feet, the soles of your feet, together as your knees drop down and open up down to the sides. Relax in this position, but make sure that the bottoms of your feet are actively held together. All 5 toes on your right foot should be flush, in line, and touching all 5 toes on your left foot. Do not force range of motion in this position. Let gravity and time do its job to externally rotate and open both hips as you diaphragmatically breathe. Just being in this position will place a slight arch in your lower back. This is how your knee position can affect your spine function. So breathe and ease into this position. Balance and symmetry check. Pay attention to how both hips feel in this position. Do you feel like one hip can rotate lower to the ground than the other? Maybe one hip feels tighter. Maybe there's a stretch in one and work in the other. Remember to breathe, and over time and with consistency, this exercise will balance out. Interlace your fingers together, lock your elbows out straight, and point your arms directly straight towards the ceiling. Keeping your elbows locked out, slowly bring both hands up and overhead as you move your hands closer to the ground. Remember to not force anything in this position. You want to find and discover your natural function and natural range of motion as you bring your arms overhead and then bring them right back to pointing directly up towards the ceiling. Balance and symmetry check. Do both shoulders open up the same? Do they both move the same? Or does one feel tighter than the other? What about your hips? Does that also translate to an imbalance with your hips? The purpose of this exercise is to open up your hip as well as reestablish the function and gliding mechanism of your shoulder blades. Think of this as a hip and shoulder opener. Start off on your hands and your knees on the floor with your knees directly underneath your hips and your hands directly underneath your shoulders. If this is bothersome on your wrists, you always have the option to drop your elbows to the ground. Now, walk your hands forward about 4 to 6 inches, which for most people is the full length of their hand or palm. Now, shift your weight forward so that your shoulders are directly over your wrists again. But don't shift too far forward to where your shoulders are in front of the wrists. There should be more than a 90-degree angle at your hips. Using the muscles in the front of your hips, tip your pelvis forward and place an arch within your lower back. Let your shoulder blades completely collapse back together underneath the weight of your body. So you're essentially using your body weight to help find your shoulder blades back together. If this is bothersome on your lower back, go ahead and take a little bit of a step backwards with your hands so you're not too far forward. Most people might even need to start in just the starting tabletop position before they can actually start walking their hands forward and develop that type of shoulder strength. Drop your head, let it hang, and relax as your shoulder blades constantly are actively pulling back together. Most importantly, breathe here. This is probably going to be an intense position for most. What we're looking for is hips and shoulders working together. You might just feel your hips, or you might just feel your shoulders, and that's okay, but take a mental note of that. As time goes on and you become more consistent, I want you to slowly start being able to feel your hips and your shoulders together. Remember, the most important thing is to breathe here. I want your breath to develop a calm, steady rhythm to it as your hips and shoulders learn to work around this relaxed breath. Lie on your side with your knees bent so that you have a 90-degree angle at your hips and at the knees. Your knees and feet should be stacked directly on top of each other. This is key throughout the entire exercise, for this should never change. Pull your shoulders back and underneath you so that the weight of your body is directly on top of your shoulder. Extend your hands straight out in front of you with your palms touching. Your palms and shoulders and elbows should also be just like your legs are, which is stacked vertically on top of each other. You can place a block or some object in front of your knees and use it as a reference to keeping your knees stacked straight, because both knees should stay touching this object throughout the entire rotation. Raise your top arm straight up in the air and take the hand of your bottom arm and use it to help hold your knees together. Allow your top arm and upper body to now fall back towards the ground and the floor behind you, keeping your knees stacked and touching the block or the object the entire time. Allow your body to fall as far as it can with what feels comfortable. This is not about finding your limit and forcing your way through. This is about finding where that limit is and breathing your way through. If you don't touch the floor, that's okay. Most people don't when they're first learning an exercise like this. But I want you to stay here from anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes. The upward level is 5, but that's pretty intense. And breathe and wait for your body to open up on its own. As you breathe deeply in and out through your stomach, let your stomach and sides expand, and then breathing out, letting your stomach and sides collapse. With each exhale, feel your body move closer to the ground. With each inhale, you might feel your body raise slightly further away from the ground. This is called breath movement, and we're using your breath to open up and rotate your spine. It's key, though, that your arm should not fall lower than the height of your shoulder. If you feel like your body is still moving, but the time is up, you can remain here a little longer, like I said, anywhere from 1 to 3, upwards of 5 minutes. Your head will eventually look in the direction that you're rotating towards. After the hold, come out of this position by doing the exact opposite. Don't just lift your legs out. I want you to stack your arm back up over top and reverse the same way that you got into this. Switch sides and repeat. Balance and symmetry check. You're probably going to find that rotating to one side feels different than rotating to the other. It might be easier for you to keep your knees stacked, rotating one way, but the knees really want to pull apart, rotating the other way. This is how imbalance and asymmetry has shown up for you, and this will change over time. This is a really intense exercise though, so take your time and breathe deeply and approach this with a very slow understanding of what your body is capable of and where the limitations are. Lie on your back with your knees bent, feet hip-width apart, and both feet pointed straight ahead. Your arms are going to be 45 degrees out to the side with your palms face up. Roll your hips backward and flatten your lower back to the floor. Use your butt muscles to do this movement. Then, using the muscles in the front of your hips, roll your hips forward to arch your lower back. You're going to repeat this as directed, and you're constantly exploring the relationship between the butt muscles, your glutes, and the front hip muscles, your hip flexors. Your glutes should roll your pelvis back, flattening your lower back, and your hip flexors should roll your pelvis forward, bringing an arch to your lower back. Most people might try to use their lower backs and abs to do this exercise at the start. I want your hips to drive this function and your hips to control your spine position instead of your lower back and your abs moving your pelvis. This is going to be a breakthrough for you when you can really understand this function and incorporate it. The idea and function of this simple little exercise is going to show up not only through the rest of this entire program, but it's going to show up in literally every single motion as you move through the day. Are you a pelvic and hip-driven mover, or do you drive all your motion through your spine? Take your time with this one. This is one of those slow, subtle, but incredibly impactful exercises. For some people, it might be intense, but the purpose here is not intensity. The purpose is function. So take your time. Lie on your back with your legs going straight up the wall. Start about 6 to 8 inches away from the wall with your hips. Flex the muscles in your upper thigh, your quad, and flex and pull your toes and feet back down towards you. Make sure that your feet and your knees are pointed straight back and not pointed or twisted outward or inward at all. Also, be sure to use the outside edge of your foot, the side where your small toe is, and pull that downwards towards you so the soles of your feet are flat and not angled. You should essentially be able to balance a cup on the bottom of each foot. That's how flat and even the entire foot's pulled back. If your tailbone and pelvis feel flat on the floor, and they don't feel like they're trying to peel up off the ground, you can scoot closer to the wall. Eventually, your hips are going to be flush, touching that wall, while your quads are tight and your feet are pulled back down towards you. None of this exercise should have force involved. You should not be forcing your pelvis down to the ground. You really have to listen to where your body's at today, and that actually might change daily. You might find some days you're closer, some days you just have to start further. This is more about asking bilateral function of the front thighs and an active pullback of the feet. The range of motion isn't critical, but the more you practice this, the closer you're going to get to the wall, essentially opening up the hamstrings and the calves and allowing the pelvis to naturally and fully extend the way it should. Balance and symmetry check. Do you feel the stretch the same in both legs? Do you feel like one leg has to work harder to point straight back than the other leg? Maybe you feel like you can pull your foot down further on your right side than your left side. This is all about how imbalance and asymmetry show up in an active loaded position like this. Take your time and breathe your way through the entire exercise. Whatever imbalances you find will start to balance out over time through consistency with this exercise and this program. Start on your hands and your knees. Your knees should be directly below your hips and your hands should be directly below your shoulders. From here, you're going to start the motion from your pelvis. Tip your pelvis forward using the muscles in the front of your hips, which is going to gently start to create an arch in your lower back. Imagine your spine, one vertebrae at a time, moving, arching from your pelvis and slowly crawling up your spine as vertebrae by vertebrae lower to the floor. Then your ribs lower to the floor. Then your shoulder blades gently start to come back together. And finally, your head looks up and forward. Once you're in full extension, start by the same way. Tuck your pelvis first. Tuck it under, attempting to keep the rest of your body still and unaffected. Your shoulders should still be together and held up. Once your pelvis is tucked under and backwards as far as it can go, then move one vertebrae at a time as you round your mid-back, then your upper back, your shoulders are going to start to separate, and then your head and neck drop towards the ground, till you are in full flexion. Take your time. This is not meant to be a speed exercise. You're going to go back and forth between positions, moving from your pelvis first and your head last. Be extremely mindful of possibly having to shift your body weight forward or shifting it backward to create this spinal motion. You want to keep your hips stacked right over your knees and your shoulders stacked right over your wrists the entire time. Remember to breathe through this motion. If it feels awkward, great, we're already on a right track. Most of us would rather move from our head and our mid-back first and our pelvis last. This is part of the problem that sets us up for a lot of movement compensations, injuries, and issues, and chronic pain later down the road, because we learned to essentially never move from our pelvis, which is where motion should start from. Turning your body back into a hip, pelvic-driven mover is one of the best things that you can do, because this restores proper spinal mechanics and helps our shoulders finally let go and be able to move without restriction or tension. So go slow, remember to breathe, and take your time. I almost want you to think of this as how slow can you go to perform each movement. Balance and symmetry check. Pay close attention to if you even feel the muscles in your front of your hips tipping your pelvis forward. Chances are high at the start, you're probably just going to be able to tip your pelvis forward by using the muscles in your back. But as you work through this program and you regain function of your hip flexors, notice how the work is going to start to move to the front of the hips. Also pay close attention. Do you feel like both sides can do this the same? Do you feel like both sides can move into the same level of extension when your back is arched? Or the same level of flexion when your back is rounded? Do some muscles cramp on one side and not the other? How about the pressure that you're placing on your hands or knees? Do you feel more weight on one side than the other? This is all, again, how imbalance and asymmetry show up within our bodies, and this should rebalance and level out. The more consistent you are, the more you practice this, and over time with this sequence. Lie on your back with your feet elevated on a surface and your legs straight out. You can use a chair, or I prefer and recommend a couch because it's softer and more forgiving. Place a block between your ankles. This block or pillow should act as a spacer rather than something that you're going to actively squeeze throughout this exercise. The number one cue here is to actively pull all 10 toes evenly back, not just pulling the foot back higher through the arches. You want to pull evenly from the inner arch and the outer edge of your foot until the entire front of your shin starts working. Now, some people might feel their shins work, others their inner legs, others maybe just their outer right hip. I want you to stay here and breathe. You're going to be here for quite a decent amount of time. Allow your legs to work. When your legs have moved to a functional, aligned, symmetrical position, this exercise is going to not really feel like anything. When there's rotation, imbalance, and dysfunction between your ankles, knees, and hips, this exercise can get pretty taxing pretty quick. I want you to pay close attention at the level of intensity that you feel here as directly proportional to the level of dysfunction between your ankles, feet, knees, and your hips. The work should slowly move from your ankles and travel up into your hips. That's what most people experience. If you don't, that is okay. Let your body go through what it needs to figure this out. Ideally, if you look down at your kneecaps, they should both be pointed straight up towards the ceiling, not one in and not one out, but both in the same position. This exercise is really about giving both legs the same stimulus and both legs truly the same work. Your upper body should remain relaxed, your abs are relaxed, and your breathing is relaxed throughout the entire duration of this exercise. This will get easier, so write down the level of challenge that you have with this on day one and track and record how you're getting functional and becoming stronger as you work through this program with this exercise. Balance and symmetry check. Do both legs work the same? Most people will find at the start that they don't. One leg truly does work different, or it's burning harder, or it's harder to pull one foot back than the other foot. This is just imbalance and asymmetry showing up within your body. Give yourself some time and space to allow both legs to receive the same stress and force and tension as you just work and sit through this position. This all will balance out over time. For this exercise, I recommend that you place a pair of athletic shoes on to give your feet a little bit of grip on whatever surface you're going to do this with, whether it's carpet or hardwood floor. Place your back against the wall and keep your feet and knees 6 inches apart. Walk away from the wall until you are in a seated position. Your hips are going to slide down the wall as your feet move forward. And make sure to keep your feet 6 inches along with your knees 6 inches apart. At no point do I want your ankles or knees going wider or closer than your hip width. Your hips should be slightly higher than your knees when you're in the final position. Your ankles should be slightly in front of your knees as well. Put pressure on your heels to drive your pelvis back into the wall. Your entire lower back should be flat on the wall too. This might seem counterintuitive because this whole program is geared to change your posture and pull you upright and open you up. But for this exercise, I don't want any muscle in your upper body to work. We are trying to put the force and the tension back into your pelvis without your spine trying to take over. So your lower back should be relaxed, your shoulders and neck should be relaxed. We're diaphragmatically breathing, allowing your belly to go in and out with every single breath. Hands on your legs, palms face up. The goal of this is to not only get your legs to work, but equally to teach your upper body to not work. So pay attention to how your upper body feels throughout this exercise. Do you try to close your fist and tense up and shrug your shoulders just to get through? Or are you able to completely shut down your upper body as your lower body figures out how to work? Throughout this exercise, most people try to jam their toes into the ground and make this a knee-loaded position. I want to gently remind you to guide the weight back into your heels so you truly feel like the quads, the muscles in the front of the thighs, are doing all the work. Balance and symmetry check. Pay attention to how both knees look. Are they the same height? Do you feel the work evenly in both legs? Or do you feel one side take over more than the other? Another way to look at balance is what I mentioned earlier. Are you able to let your upper body relax, or do you constantly tense it up to get through this exercise?